Let's take you now to another developing story. The G20 finance ministers and central bank governors convening there for a two-day meeting from today until, of course, in fact, from yesterday till tomorrow. And I do understand Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago is speaking. Let's listen in.
Takeaways from the discussions that we have had.
Thank you very much, Governor and Minister. I'll take your questions. Can you please indicate right here in the front? A microphone will come to you. Okay, please can you stand? There's a microwave coming your way.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Paul Wallace. I'm with Bloomberg News. I just had a quick question about whether Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, attended the talks, and if so, what was his contribution?
Thank you. Minister?
He did attend the last night's session, which was talking largely about the issues the governor is referring to. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, he was not largely contrary to what people expect him in contradicting anything that was saying, except was elaborating more on the rationale for what the Trump administration is doing on tariffs, the stuff that you probably know.
Thank you. I'll move. Can I see who else has a question? Right over there. That's right.
Thank you for taking my question. I'm Tsubasa Yamazaki from Kyodo News, Japan. I have a quick question. Given that the Trump administration's tariff hikes are expected to slow down the global economy, could you explain why you did not issue the joint statement and communicate?
Okay.
Thank you.
No, we took a conscious decision even before that if we don't issue a communique, the standard practice since Indonesia after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you will recall, there has been difficulty in the finance sector to issue a communique since then. But the standard practice we've established is that in the absence of a communique, we issue a chairman's statement. In this regard, we took a decision as a presidency that in this particular session, we're not going to issue a chairman's statement. We'll do that in July. It has got nothing to do with.
We are working towards a communique in July. We hope that we come out with a communique. If it doesn't happen, we might end up with a chairman's statement.
Okay, I've got two hands over there, the one at the back. That's right.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Paez. I'm with Tax Notes. My question is a two-part one, and it's for the finance minister. I was wondering, was there any discussion of the international tax architecture during this meeting, and what was the nature of that discussion? And then also, will the South Africa G20 presidency be focusing at all on international tax negotiations like the ones happening at the UN about the tax framework convention or the OECD? And will the presidency be reviving the taxation of the super rich proposal under the Brazilian G20 presidency? Thank you.
No, in this part, we limited, as I indicated, our agenda was very limited for this specific session, and we didn't go into the detail of the tax arrangements. But as you are aware, via the OECD has been providing technical advice on the, and some of the aspects of those tax agreements have been implemented by a number of countries. There is that process, but the United Nations has developed a second process. We are of the view that these processes must of necessity not compete but be complementary. And as a result, we are making a contribution to the UN process, and we will be part of the discussion in the finance for development in Spain.
Thank you. I'll take one in the front.
Thank you. My name is Sandra from Sina Finance of China. I wonder, in the midst of the U.S. tariff and retaliatory measure from other major economies, how has the meeting discussed on how the G20 countries will coordinate to safeguard the global trade, and also how to prevent the excessive volatility in the emerging market? Thank you.
Basically, what you are having is that the negotiations that are taking place bilaterally, and it is very resolved as a call that we should restore the multilateral system, and the multilateral system with respect to trade would have the World Trade Organization at the center of those negotiations. And you know, if we go back, we will realize that the last big agreement that was made with respect to trade was the Uruguay round, and it's more than 30 years ago. So since that had happened, a lot of things took place. We now have the internet, you have got digital assets and so forth, and the way in which we are going to have to look at trade would of necessity mean that the rules that you have had in place are going to have to be relooked, and that was the reflection that actually took place.
In the centre here.
Hello, Daniel Davis, Agence France Presse. Thanks for taking my question. You spoke in your opening remarks about the need to de-escalate trade tensions and reduce the current volatility in the financial markets. I just wonder, could you give us some more insight into the nature of those conversations over the last couple of days, and what were the contributions on this topic from the United States and China specifically? Thank you.
I do not negotiate trade agreements. Ministers do. But basically, the point here was that the tit for tat that takes place means that we might actually not be talking to each other, that we need to actually open the dialogue so that we talk to each other, that we are coming to the point where the tensions have become so elevated that even when a hand is being extended so that one country is reaching out, we might not see that hand because things had become so tense. It's important that those conversations take place. There are time limits that had been set. Some tariffs are supposedly off the table for a period of 90 days. It's ticking every day. The days are becoming fewer. And in an environment where every country is negotiating bilaterally, these things could actually take a lot of time, and meaning that the uncertainty might be with us for long, and that there was a call that says that you have got to actually be de-escalating, and the way to de-escalate is to actually be engaged in dialogue.
That was your session. That's why I'm giving it to you. But let me just add one point. The general principle of rejecting protectionism and commitment to multinational trade system and a rules-based system was broadly the main principle accepted in the meeting.
Thank you. I'll take one more in the room. I've got a few questions online. Please go ahead.
I'm Katie McMahon from Octus. My question is about G20 and its role as co-chair of the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable. I want to ask, to what extent is the G20 worried about liquidity crises and solvency crises for low-income countries with high levels of debt? A three-pillar approach has been recommended to help some countries facing liquidity strains. Has any step been taken to implement that framework? And is it still the case that you think that liquidity is more of an issue as compared with solvency?
Yeah. As I indicated, that key among the things we're dealing with is debt sustainability. And critical in that discussion is that a number of countries not only face that, some of them are facing balance of payment problem. I don't know whether IMF gave us a figure. So the issue is, how do we improve the current common framework to deal with that question? So it is a challenge. That's why people were raising that a key principle is what we must discuss. How do we make sure that these countries have got access to affordable and concessional capital, and therefore deal with the challenge of the cost of capital and how these people access the cost at which they access that capital. So broadly, there's agreement, and we've therefore developed a framework to the extent of saying what lessons can we draw from the case studies that are going to be published of those countries that have gone through the common framework.
Thank you. I've got a question online from Hilary Joffe from the Business Day. Her question is to the Governor. The Governor suggested this week that the G20 processes needed to be streamlined and a focus on fewer priorities. There was also a suggestion to separate the finance and the Sherpa tracks and possibly establish a permanent secretariat. Is there any traction with the proposals that you've put forward? What reforms to G20 processes have been discussed in the meeting, if at all? There is another question.
South Africa made a very conscious decision that with respect to the finance track, we are not going to add new items. And the reason was very simple. What happens with the G20 is that every presidency adds an item. There isn't a mechanism to subtract, or where we would say this is now bedded and we must actually have it behind us. And one of the things that had been coming through the conversation was that we launched the regulatory reform agenda in the aftermath of the great financial crisis. And that regulatory reform agenda, at the heart of it, was Basel III. And that as we were implementing Basel III, there were refinements that were taking place, and that we need to finalize the implementation so that we give certainty to the regulated sector, something that in this country is called the Basel III endgame, so that we know we have done that. And the reforms that have so far been implemented have proved to have been very, very relevant, because the financial system is much more resilient than it was before the global financial crisis. The G20 started, the genesis of the G20 was with the finance track. And what had happened had been now, the G20 includes lots of other tracks. The problem that you have is that the other tracks end up either finding themselves in the finance track, or some of the finance tracks end up being discussed elsewhere. And that becomes a problem, and we needed to streamline. So Minister Godongwana here was referring earlier on to things that prevented the finance track from having a communique. And the reason was not very difficult to find. Things that are supposed to be discussed at the Sherpa track ended up coming into the finance minister's track, and that clouds the discussions that the finance track actually has. So this year, for the South African presidency, in the finance track, for example, we decided we will have a focus with respect to cross-border payments. And we picked up cross-border payments for a reason. And it was because the cost of remittances in the African continent had proved to be higher than many corridors elsewhere in the world. But importantly was that there was political commitment to bringing down the cost of cross-border payments, because under the Saudi presidency that was adopted at the Leaders Summit. And we decided that is what we are going to focus on, and we are going to finalize that. In the process, though, the Shepherd's Track was discussing the issue of the cost of capital, for which the finance track said this belongs with the finance track, and that is how it got translated into the finance track, and that is what the minister was actually referring to. So we've streamlined the agenda. We didn't add anything from the finance track because we were very clear we needed to finalize what is actually on the G20's agenda.
Thank you. I have one last question also from Hilary Jaffe from the Business Day. Can you tell us more about the high-level panel on Africa chaired by Trevor Manuel, what proposal it has offered for the G20 finance track?
He's sitting at the back trying to, he's probably following me that I'm not misrepresenting him.
Can you just, Minister, I think please go ahead.
Yeah, do you want to take it, Trevor? Yeah, he must take it.
The chair of the panel.
The chair of the panel, he must himself tell us what he's doing.
Can I ask you to stand, please?
Thank you very much. I was minding my own business, and Minister Godongwana thought that I should chair the panel in Africa. We have 24 panelists drawn from primarily across the African continent, 21 from across the African continent, from the 4 language groups, Anglophone, Francophone, Lusophone, and Arabic, so that we can produce a product that feels African, not exclusively because some of the panelists are from outside of the continent. The terms of reference are clear. The big challenge that confronts us is that we must have a product that we can hand to heads of state at the end of August. We must complete our work by the end of August. And so we've developed a chairperson's framework to which panelists are now contributing. It's a fairly rich process of work running. I'm pretty sure that we will have a reasonable product, not a complete product, but a reasonable product by the time that we have to hand it over to heads of state via the G20 formal process at a ministerial level. And there is a sense amongst panelists who met last night that if the work, it's unlikely that the work will be concluded. We will then continue, perhaps under the guise of UNECA, to ensure that some of those strands of work are carried forward and Africa can own the process of its policy direction. Many of the issues that were raised by the Governor and yourself, Minister, are included in the process, and we'd also probably take forward the World Bank theme on jobs as a fundamentally important issue going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. We do have time for one more question, Minister. Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Camille Shikoya from the Africa Bazaar magazine, and I'm sorry I'm late. I was attending another event. My question to you is, as we know in Africa, the informal sector is a big sector. And oftentimes when we count the GDP, that sector is left out. So given that this is the first time that the G20, which is the 20 biggest economic in the world, is being hosted in Africa, what are you doing to bring this sector as the finance minister and central bank governor to make sure the informal sector are now brought into the regular sector? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we've got we've got no specific sectoral focus on informal sector. However, there are different expertise which could help us formulate a proposition in this regard. I don't know whether anybody is giving the expert panel some contribution so that they could put that into as part of the contribution. To me, that would be useful. Of the problem, for instance, the ILO said today in the meeting. That's why I'm saying we're drawing it from a number of people. The ILO made the point that I don't know how accurate that information is, that about 84% of employment on the African continent is from that sector. So clearly the ILO will contribute inside, and there's a panel of experts but as I indicated, we don't have a sectoral focus on that issue, but I think it's an important point we need to be taking into account. I mean, in South Africa, some of my colleagues in Treasury were saying we complain about unemployment, but if you look at the formal employment, as a percentage of the labor force, we're almost the same side as other countries. Our problem is the informal sector, which we've not captured properly. So I agree with you, it's a matter that needs attention.
Thank you very much. That concludes our press conference. Thank you very much for joining us. And that's it. Thank you.
And that wraps up there the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors media briefing there. Remember that they were convening a meeting on the sidelines of the IMF and World Bank Springs meetings that were taking place in Washington, D.C. It's quite interesting to listen to some of what is coming out there. You, of course, had even a number of journalists in the beginning there who were asking the questions as to why is there no joint communique? And they were signaling that why not the U.S. then and South Africa issue a joint communique, particularly because the United States is the incoming president of the G20. But they did, of course, speak about the fact that when you listen to the minister, they're saying that, in fact, they were part of the meeting, that is the US, and they did discuss quite a number of issues there. As far as the issues of trade are concerned, for example, saying that the Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago saying there's a need to de-escalate the trade tensions. And I quote, the tit for tat that takes place means that we are not talking to each other. And in fact, conversations must indeed take place, as we are now finding ourselves with, of course, fewer days as far as the tariff hikes are concerned, because remember, there is that 90-day pause that excludes China. And at the same time, they talk about the fact that all of this is, in preparation for then the president's, the chairman's statement, rather, that they are looking at releasing in July. But they do say that the issues of trade did form part of the discussions there at the same time. And then they also speak about the issue of the informal economy, as you heard there, to say that how do you begin to deal with this? Because when you're looking at a continent like Africa, for example, the informal sector is quite big and it does need some kind of a planning around it. And the finance minister saying that this is something that could be helpful, as much as right now he's not certain if there is that kind of expertise that is being brought forward to try and deal with this, but it could be a bit more helpful. And then the issue of debt, which is quite another big one, as you of course keep on hearing about, and this is of course liquidity strains that some of the countries are currently facing. They say that they did discuss the issue of sustainability as far as liquidity is concerned, and a number of countries. But the big theme does revolve around the US as well as South Africa. And also interesting to note that today, just concluding that visit there to South Africa, that is Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, the presidency releasing a statement that also in part speaks about the fact that the president, that's President Cyril Ramaphosa, managed to speak to President Donald Trump yesterday on a phone call to discuss the peace process in Ukraine, and saying that both of them agreed that the war should be brought to an end as soon as possible to prevent further death and destruction, saying that President Trump and President Ramaphosa have also agreed to meet soon to address this and relations between South Africa as well as the United States. And I quote from the statement, we both spoke about the need to foster good relations between our two countries, and also saying that, President Cyril Ramaphosa had an earlier call with the Russian president, that is Vladimir Putin, talking about the commitment towards ensuring that there is that peace process there in Ukraine. So quite a lot of interesting points coming out from this meeting. Our international news editor, Sof Mukwena, will also be wrapping some of these developments for us.